So we were talking about kind of sensory overload, and you were talking about words on screen. What did you think of the text message in cinema, which is like pretty much the most boring thing, seeing somebody texting their phone, but in House of Cards, it's done not terribly, how it kind of pops up on the screen.
Well, I think what I was saying there was that it's interesting is, yeah, that's become a conceit, a visual conceit already. I mean, you see it quite well done well on television, like House of Cards, yes, but Sherlock, I think, is maybe even a better example, where you see his Google searches, well, it's pretty called something else, isn't it? Because they always have these fake search engines, don't they, in films and TV. That's done quite nicely, but I think it's not something that can go on forever. I think it's something people will tire of. It's not very cinematic. I think what I'm saying is something that has to be rationed, the notion of words on the screen. If you go and see Men, Women and Children, which probably almost certainly nobody here has because it's a huge flop, that's where it's total overload. You've this scene where kids walk around the school and you can see above their heads their very digital communications. It's a dead end. You know, that's not how you communicate visually on film. So I think you can only go so far.
Any questions from our audience for our speakers? Yeah, one right here. If you just holler, we'll hear you.
All right. I just wanted to get your opinion on the idea of just regarding, say, AI achieving sentience or sapience. Just wanting to get the idea of why is it in films in particular they have this notion that with intelligence becomes a coldness and a lack of empathy? Because surely with intelligence becomes empathy. Like there is a general idea that smarter people are more empathetic in general, because and more. It's this idea in film seems to be that if you are very smart, you do not have any feelings for other people, like Spock in like Star Trek.
Or Mark Zuckerberg. Or Mark Zuckerberg. Sorry, I should say Mark Zuckerberg, I should say, in case he plans to sue me. I mean, yeah, Jesse Eisenberg's Mark Zuckerberg in Facebook.
Well, I just wanted to get your opinions on that very idea of, the idea of, why the intelligence being cold and say, technology getting to this stage as well. Why is it so deep?
Why are computers always evil geniuses and no empathy at all, really?
There you go, yeah.
Well, I mean, the other guys would pronounce this better than I could, but I guess the supposition is that's one of the hardest things to fake. I think they're probably working from that premise that, we all have computers in our home that can fake all kinds of things that human intelligences do, but none of them have come close, really, to faking empathy, right? I think, to be fair to them, there probably is, and that was the core of your question, was about empathy, was about having something which can feel as we do. I would guess there's a logical point to it there. But I mean, the simple answer to your question is I got to that in talk there a little bit about how utopia is really boring and dystopia is really exciting, is because it's very hard to make a story about it. It's harder to make a story about a benign computer that isn't going to kill us all. I mean, you have them in the background. I mean, you have, as I say, Jarvis and Iron Man. I suppose Mother and Alien is quite cold and pathetic. You're quite right. But you have them here and there. But it's very hard to generate a story because stories require. Now, maybe that goes. There should be ways of doing it. Clearly, that's kind of lazy. We say, well, we have a computer, we want a story, let's have the computer try and take over the world. There are ways. I think actually, if you look at her, I think Samantha, though she does become an antagonist to the Joaquin Phoenix character, probably is empathetic in that. She's kind of a bit too empathetic. She runs off with other programs. But I think that's a fair attempt to counteract what you're talking about.
Does that tie in with what you're talking about, sort of voice styling and sort of the uncanniness of computer voices, where we see in her, you have an empathetic computer, sounds very human, and you have Hal, who, or in The Matrix, they're human voices, but they're affected. They're trying to sound more computer-like because they have less empathy. They're a bit more evil in a way.
Well, I wouldn't worry too much about it. You can't even model, proper emotional speech. Like my PhD was in emotional speech, and if you were to ask me, what is empathy, or how would you embody empathy in an artificial way, just couldn't answer you because it's too complex. It's to do with experience, it's to do with knowledge, it's to pull all these different things together. It's not just about information. I think actually as well, when you're talking about why is it always machines are seen as when they become intelligent, they become evil. I think it's more about having knowledge rather than having intelligence. They have all this vast knowledge, like you were saying about they're networked, so they have all this massive amount of knowledge. And if you look at example of organizations or people who have vast amounts of knowledge, a lot of the time they're not necessarily using it for good reasons. Google has the whole don't be evil, but there's lots of things that they've done over the years that people would say, well, that's not exactly right, just because you've got this mass knowledge. So I'd say computers can't be empathic until we understand what it is, and even then trying to put it into something that doesn't have the range of experiences that we do would be very difficult. But I think it's more actually about when they gain huge amounts of knowledge and are able to use it or understand it in an intelligent way without actually necessarily being intelligent in of themselves.
Do we have another question from the audience? I think there was one way up at the back, was there? Or, do you have a question? Oh, no, sorry, you're reaching for the camera. Okay, right there. Sorry, the lights are bright. Mic's coming to you now.
I guess it just follows on from a few of those things that you were talking about, and emotional intelligence and empathy and all of these various different things, and the fact that we like to feel like as individuals, surely I will have a different response to Heston Blumenthal's meal than the person I'm having it with, etc., based on our experiences. And I'm just wondering, I suppose, how do you quantify a lot of these things, specifically the dining experiences and, percentages of things, my whiskey tastes 15% grassier in the grassy room. How do you quantify these things?
So that can be something as simple as paper and pencil tests.
But in terms of
the individual differences in that. So that can be hard. I mean, there are some things that are kind of, if we ask people, what is your perfect meal? So everyone in the room would give a different kind of response. It could be the fancy 3-star restaurant, but it could be by the beach, or it could be on the summer meadow with a picnic. All those will be plausible and all different. And yet hopefully there's some things you can draw out that are kind of universal. So maybe it's all about mood and emotion. And that's kind of the common theme, that the food will taste better if you're in a good mood. Or there are other factors like if you taste food with heavier calorie, it will, for most people, make it better. And that there will be some differences, individual differences. They're going to get rolled into the mix in a way. You say, probably as a psychologist, the first thing is to say, well, if it's 8 out of 10 people go a certain way, then we'll say everyone does. And then only later figure out kind of the differences between those who are maybe neophobes and hate the idea of any kind of surprises in their food and would hate to go to a restaurant like that, and the neophiles who'd love more and more and more sensory kind of stuff.
Just on that surprises and neophiles, and is that two groups of people? People who want surprises in their food, or people who want the intensity of what they expect? You showed the VR that changed tuna into salmon. Mm-hmm. Are there some people who want that, or people who want the tuna to just be, take over the whole room and have the smell of it and the sound of it, be inside a tuna while they're eating?
So I think there definitely are the two groups of those who like and those who don't, whether it's in terms of novel experiences or whether it's in terms of surprise. And kind of part of the fun or interest for us is that normally when you have surprise things that look one way and taste different, that's like bad. It's something wrong here. It's off. It's poisonous. It's in my mouth, and that's really potentially a very bad thing. Normally in daily life, if things aren't as you expect, that's kind of negative. Whereas in these sort of curated restaurant experiences, suddenly it becomes nice and you want more of it. So what's the switch there between you're in this kind of special designed experience? So even for those who do like all the sensory surprises and shocks, they only like it, I think, under certain conditions.
Another question from the audience. Oh, no, not back there. Oh, we're nearly out of time, is what you're saying. Okay, maybe one more question before we cut off. Anybody? Right here. Okay, yeah. Mike's coming to you.
Sorry, can I just ask about, I think ask everybody, maybe particular Donald, about the kind of 3D, 4D, all the different kind of things Charles alluded to in terms of, the smell of vision, all that kind of thing in cinema. Is it all just essentially, which I kind of consider is distractions from the actual thing that's going on if you're sitting in a cinema? That like 3D, but that into some various other things that we don't need any other experiences other than what we're experiencing. And do you think it's just a way of getting an extra book?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go home now and I just say yes, and that's I mean, you'll find it hard to locate a film critic who likes 3D. And that was true in the 1950s when it came around on the first occasion. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't work very well. Is the short answer to why we don't like it doesn't work very well. It also, I mean, there's also a technical problem, which particular technical problem is if you talk to, I've talked to various Pixar filmmakers, for example, and I've said to them, look, I don't like this technology. Set aside the fact that you're sitting in Pixar's own cinema and watching a 3D film, watching Up, and it's beautifully projected, think, okay, it's fine, you know, I go. My problem is my eyes adjust too quickly, personally, is that I find that after 10 minutes I've forgotten it's in 3D. I mean, almost completely forgotten it's in 3D. But set that aside, the fact is that I would say, this is not scientific, and I'm in the scientific space, so this is wrong, but I apologize, but I would guess about 30% of 3D prints that are projected in cinemas are projected too darkly. So there are certain cinemas which I won't name in this city, which are particularly guilty in that respect. You go and you sit down, you look and say, this is too, I can't bloody see it. I mean, I know this, I saw, for example, Prometheus in Fox's studios in London. Well, so the first 30 minutes, I should say, when they were just doing an interview and they hadn't got it finished. And it looked, it's a dull film, but it looked beautiful and it was bright. Then I saw it here and I could barely see it, it was so dark. So that's one just technological point. They're projected too darkly in huge numbers of cinemas. But your essential point is correct, is that these things have come along at a point when Hollywood is panicking. It came along in the 1950s when they panicked about television. And you got some of this change in screen shape were useful. Not all of them. You had this huge Panavision thing, which I think some director said is only useful for snakes and funerals, which was I don't mean Panavision. Sorry, I mean Vistascope. I mean anyway, the really long one, which you get. But I mean that was useful, and that led to new screen shapes which we still see. But you know the Emergo with skeletons rattling across the screen and. 3D most obviously, and later Smell-O-Vision, which John Waters, to be fair, the other John Waters, used amusingly as a gag. That's all good fun, but they are essentially gimmicks because they don't work very well. I mean, that's not. I'm sure if you had a generally immersive 3D, then we might be somewhere. But they're always going to be gimmicks, reactions against something else. I mean, 3D came in at a point at which people were starting to watch films on their computers, and I think it's no coincidence that happened.
That sounds like it's because you notice it. You know, if you notice it happening,
that's right.
and it interrupts you, it's not working well. It's one of those 15D is just kind of taking you out of the moment. Whereas the seashell, which you put the headphones on, that's quite deliberate. You know you're not at the sea, but it works in that case.
Well, there's a challenge. If you notice it, it's distracting. Well, why do we have to have that? If it works so well that you don't notice it's there, you think, why do I need it? Well, that's taking it extra for. But I sort of think somehow, and maybe the sort of technical side would also be there, and sort of the releasing smells and clearing big spaces in time, kind of gives you sort of technical challenges that it's difficult to overcome. But that's my sort of hope is that maybe some of the chefs and the creators working with the chefs in that sort of dining space, it's much easier to innovate, to try things out and see what works. And there must be, and I think it's kind of conceptually the case that adding those extra senses could never work. If the technological problems are solved, then there will be sort of certain kinds of experiences that will be.
But I think you're making an interesting point there about if you notice it, you don't notice it. My problem with 3D is actually that it ceases to work. I think I know that people still say the same thing, but my eyes adjust. So in a funny way, so it ceases to seem deep. It's not actually that I've got used to it as a technique. Is that the technique really stops working?
I'm getting the signal from the back that the next session is getting ready to start. But let's give a quick round of applause for all our speakers.